And it just says technology. Hey, you guys. Test. Hey, I can't get the link on the website to join so I can share my screen as a panelist. Can you send me a link, or is there a different spot I should go?
About
hand-me-downs, but they never go beyond you because then they're too old.
So the baby gets brand new.
Yeah.
Glad to know that you aren't holding any grudges from.
The baby gets away with everything. You used to get grounded for, the baby does not get grounded for.
No.
In fairness, I was a complete a-hole, so when I was grounded, I earned it. So I'm not gonna bellyache about.
Well,
I remember getting the belt for something my sister did, who never did anything.
Of course not.
She was an angel.
Oh,
She was an angel.
you got the belt for her?
But I got the belt. And,
I had three
of
sisters.
course, they didn't believe me. I didn't do it. And then finally she steps forward crying. She says, I did it, and look at my dad and he says, well, that's for something I didn't catch it.
More than likely.
oh my goodness
Did you
gracious.
get one then
Yeah,
after?
I had three
No,
sisters. It depended on who the
The younger
golden
one always
child
could play
was,
a
which
game
one
and
was
get out of trouble.
innocent.
We are in a special meeting with the planning department to discuss proposed ordinance BCRC 11-127, notice of demolition or removal or structure demolition or removal. And I will now turn this over. Oh, pardon me. I am Chairman Luke Ahmet, and Commissioners Stephen Bradshaw and Asia Williams are also present, as well as Planning Director Bell and Assessor Engelhardt. And I will turn it over to Mr. Gabel.
So probably about 2 months ago, month and a half, I was approached by Corey from the assessor's office, who's like your deputy, right? Chief deputy, with a request, more or less a question of, do we have anything in the code that requires any kind of notice to the county or any kind of permit for a demolition of a structure? And I guess the concern or what caused the question was a number of, was it tax cancellations that had to be processed due to improper assessing of structures that had been removed or demolished in previous years. So that kind of stems the kind of how we started. I presented this, so we worked in collaboration. I contacted Road and Bridge, GIS, and the assessors, and drafted this with the planners and with assistance from those different departments. This would really affect, and we can go through the pros and cons of it. Anyway, so we came down to the final version, met with them, made some final changes to it, and then presented it to the board in the update meeting earlier this month. It was requested by the board that we hold an additional workshop, which we're doing today, before presenting it in a work session, or in the on a Tuesday morning meeting to adopt it as an ordinance. So just as a reminder, Title 11 changes as well as Title 14 changes like this don't require any kind of public hearing or public notices. The notice gets put out after the ordinance gets adopted, so there'll be a notice in the paper that the ordinance changed. I did check with Bill, and you can hold a public hearing for changes to Title 11 and 14. We can notice that public hearing, and you can, and here's Katie, and you can allow, you know, that for that process to happen if that's something you guys wanted us to do. So, and we're more than happy to. We've only made minor changes to Title 11 to date in the last year, just some minor fixes essentially, which this is a more substantial change to it. So if you think it warrants a public hearing, we can do that. That would just take typically a 15-day notice in the paper, and then sometime whatever works best for your guys' schedule and have a public hearing. So that being said, you have two different versions of the same ordinance, and I'll present those on the screen here shortly. We can kind of go over each one, and then if you have questions for me, feel free. And then Dennis is here to kind of give you the perspective from the assessor's side and the problems it solves on his end. So I did work with one of the members of the Daily Bee, Lauren, to publish a newspaper article regarding this and something else. It didn't turn out exactly how I expected it to, but I've learned some lessons from that. So. Just know it did get in the paper that we're working on this and that this workshop would be held today. So that being said, I haven't had any other questions from members of the public regarding this to date. It hasn't been, super publicized out there. So the idea is adding a demolition ordinance to the building regulations, Title 11, in order to capture more accurate assessment records and non-conforming structures. The ordinance includes details about applicability, application contents, procedures, fees, and inspections. So the first draft is, call it a more lenient approach. It's just a notice of demolition. So the application contents are what we would consider the minimum we would need to assure that the building being demolished or removed is the correct one. So just a site plan, and there's some contents of that. The schedule, a copy of the recorded deed, the typical things for any kind of permit. And then if any kind of erosion control plan is necessary to remove that. So we have some specifics in Chapter 7 in environmental that might be affected by this. And this gives us a kind of a three-step approach for the procedure. So we would require essentially a form they can fill out saying notice of demolition. One copy each is send over to the assessor's office. We would also route it to GIS if it's a dwelling that's being demolished and not being rebuilt, so that they can retire that address, and 911 records and emergency service records would be more accurate. And then we'd require or request a copy. This came from the assessor's office, a date timestamp of a photo of the structure to be demolished, and then that's a before and after. So we haven't determined what a fee would be on this. I would consider something minimal. We have a fee schedule pending that we're going to bring forward before you guys in the near future. So if necessary, we could add a fee to cover that. I would say something, I don't see this taking a lot of staff time, so like maybe an hour, so $20 to $25 fee if no inspection's required, and then additional fee if an inspection is requested. So the big change or the difference between version 1 and 2 is this inspection and then the application content. So the inspection is, in this case, is non-mandatory for demolishing or removing a structure. This is one of the problems it solves on the planning side, is oftentimes we have non-conforming structures, especially like lake frontage properties, where they demolish it and then we have to rely on them to give us some kind of proof of the size and shape and location of that structure for non-conformity if they're going to rebuild it. So this gives an opportunity and an avenue for them to request an inspection prior to demolishing the structure that would capture and memorialize that structure in the location it was. So that helps us on the planning side to say, here's your route forward. In lieu of an inspection by planning staff, we could do, we added in here an inspection report from a professional engineer, architect, or licensed surveyor shall be acceptable in lieu of that compliance. We could also add into that list certified landscape architect if you want. That typical stamped licensed professional. We have that for other like stormwater and other kind of plans. So that was a request after I sat down with Mr. Domke and reviewed this recently. So, here's version 2. This would be a permit rather than just a notice. So the application contents are a little more in depth. We have some information in here, and let's see, a site plan. So give more detail on the site plan for environmental, I believe. The procedure, this fire safety provision is added in this. If we're concerned about fire safety and compliance when demolishing or removing a structure. And then the inspection is required in this version with kind of a timeline or correspondence of how that's going to happen. So I'd like to give you guys options to consider. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at with it. You guys understand the intent behind it, where we're at? Do you have any questions for me regarding this, or what changes do you want to see? So
I got an issue with, say Mr. Korn wants to tear down his old well house.
sure.
Why should he have to pull a permit and pay a fee to tear down his old structure?
That's fair.
In order to address the assessor, because I agree actually with what Commissioner Bradshaw said, and why is it not that we just say, if you're going to remove a structure from the tax rolls, that there's an expectation that they remove it before we are assessing their values, and if they didn't, then it won't count. Because we're making everybody conform because some people don't let you know that they've taken a property off of, and so when I look at my area and what our area is always frustrated with, it always does come down to assessors and what feels like micromanaging private property, and then at what point is what structure demolished on your property, and paying a permit. We're creating more work instead of putting the onus on the owner to notify. Just in statute, you could say you must notify within 15 days of demolishing a structure that's on the tax rolls, and if you didn't do that, then you pay your taxes. Because we're opening it up for more work on our end and more work on the part of, it's just, it feels like we're doing more policing of what people are doing on their property, which even now I know there's the question came up over doing flyovers, but in this one, why not just give the consequence to the person who didn't notify and say you should have pulled it off your taxes? And it needs to be done before you start that assessing period, and that is the know your rule. And if they didn't do it, then you go through your Board of Equalization complaint and say, when did you do it? Why didn't you notify? You didn't notify, so you got to pay taxes on it.
Dennis Engelhardt for the record. If I understand your position, you would suggest an ordinance that says if you demolish some real property or some structure or improvements on your property, you don't notify the assessor before the assessor conducts their value, which takes place on January 1 of every year. Mm-hmm. If you remove something or it was destroyed and you didn't let us know, you are going to pay the assessed tax as if that was still there for that preceding year, because we always do values for the preceding year. So 22 would be paid in 23, 23 would be paid in 24. If you remove something in 23 and you didn't let us know, you're going to pay taxes. You're going to pay the taxes in 24 as if it was still there. In 24, we'll remove it so that in 25 you don't pay for it.
Yeah, because then it's putting the responsibility on the people that are not notifying, because they should want it to come off the tax rolls when they do it. And so that advisement should be to the person who's not notifying, versus, because there are a lot of people that tear down structures and build it back up. I mean, it just feels like we're increasing the work for a valid concern that you guys have of people say, oh, it's no longer there, or we got rid of that piece. But we technically don't even really know if, when people tell us they've removed their manufactured home or trailer thing, sometimes those are ones that happens to. We don't really know when they really did it, because they only tell us when it's time for taxes. But in this case, it puts responsibility on me to tell you, if you were charging me for a shed and I tore it down, I should be telling you when I tear it down to have it removed from my taxes. Instead of the whole county has to permit itself to take things down.
So they would just do a verbal notification to the assessor?
No written, because you can't prove verbal. You could just
I mean,
make a,
they would come in and say,
Yeah.
hey, I tore down my garage, we would ask for a photo, digital photo with it.
well, you can do all of those things. I'm asking, why is it that the whole county has to pull permits for demolition instead of letting it be our responsibility as property
It would only be the
owners?
people who actually wanted, so those people that do the demolition would be the only ones that would be required to pull these permits. So it wouldn't be everybody that has to.
Well, I mean, when you have the ordinance, that's what people have to comply with, but why not just say, if I wanted to pull down a structure, that it's my responsibility to let the assessor know within whatever time frame versus pulling of permits and.
Is there anything in our ordinance that governs the assessor's office outside of planning? Like, is there anywhere in
State
the,
statute.
so there's not a place where we can modify ordinance that requires something that goes through the assessors? That's why it came through planning, that's why it's in Title 11. So that's essentially what we try to do
Right,
here,
but
is
you could
create
make
that
that the
notice.
rule in Title 11 though.
Absolutely,
So that's what I'm asking, why make a, like that instead of the expectation if you're going to remove a structure is that you must report it to the assessor's office at whatever time makes
And if
sense.
you're tearing it down and putting something else in its place, you're gonna get a building permit anyway.
Well, you're gonna get, yeah, well, typically.
Theoretically. If you're not gonna get a permit, you're gonna get nicked by Katie down the road, so.
Well, there's other ways, because sometimes people tear down a good amount of their structure, but they might leave part of that structure up and reconstruct it. It's,
That's a remodel, that takes a permit.
Yeah, that would require a location.
if it's on the same,
Yeah, if you're changing the dimensions of a structure on your property, you're gonna have to do a relocation to make sure that those dimensions don't violate easements and stuff like that. So you're gonna have to.
if you change the dimensions.
If
though.
you change the
Yeah.
dimensions.
If you keep
So-
the same footprint, it's not a big deal.
What's your thought on holding the person who's demolishing
Well,
responsible?
we in effect are doing that in a practical sense with what Jake is suggesting. My objective is to get that information into the assessor's office so that that appraiser can look at it and make the appropriate adjustments on that so that we don't, when it does come to our attention, have to do
Cancellation.
Yeah.
a cancellation. You know, we're coming to you all the time with these cancellations after the fact. I mean, they're small, some of them are small, but it takes up your time, it takes up our time, and it also removes revenue from the county that the county is kind of counting on. So now you have to reproject what your assets are. So I'd like to have that resolved before we even develop the budgets or we tell you what that total county value is. Whether that's done the way that Jake is suggesting it, or some other verbiage that you're suggesting it, as long as it's in Title 11, and we can hold people accountable, those that don't notice. And I have really no objection to what you're suggesting, as long as it accomplishes the same.
So are you in support of this ordinance? The
way it's
assessor's
read,
office?
The way that it's been written would accomplish what we need, but if there's another version, if there's another term, if another strategy that accomplishes the same thing.
Yeah, it'd be to my benefit
I'm not
if I
opposed to-
notify
I'm
you
not
if I
opposed
tear
to
down that old house.
As long as what
Then it's not
we
on
want to
tax roll
accomplish is
anymore.
accomplished. I don't care what it's called or what it's.
So some type of notification requirement would be a good thing. But far as making somebody pull a permit to tear down their own stuff, yeah, I'm 100% against that.
And then
Probably
the
will
other,
never change on that.
and the other
But
thing
there
is
should
your
be some
hours.
type of notification, benefits
Well,
the owner.
That's why we wrote that first draft as notice of demolition and removal, right? So it's a notice to
first one
us.
is a
I see
notice.
this as like a one-page form.
And I'm good with that.
It's,
Yeah.
if you don't want to charge a fee, we can remove the fee. Just know it'll take some of my staff time to do these, so.
That was the other reason for my suggestion was to remove the 25 hours of staff time because it puts the obligation on the individual to give that notice to the assessor's office so that it can be pulled off the
Before and
tax
after
rolls.
picture and
Right, and as long as.
some type of landmark in it, so you know.
So I think-
As a
Same
carrot
piece of
carrot
dirt.
stick thing, if we have that ordinance, it's up to that individual to notify us. If they don't notify us within a certain time frame, if it's past January 1 of the following year, that assessment is already done.
Yeah,
So
you'll pay that year.
They're gonna have to pay it for that next year, and as long as that's clear to them.
So what if we did this, because I think this is one that reasonably, I think it wouldn't be a bad workshop for community input on that direction, because you might be, either way, I just don't like the using staff because some people aren't doing it, and I don't like the fee on it. And the increase of planning, just policing people's private property, but I 100% understand why that we need to be notified of it. I just don't want to, I don't like the fee. And I don't, when we're talking about planning hours, I don't think we could put the onus on the owners. But I think workshop might be a good way to address this kind of a change, in my opinion. But I'm with Bradshaw, and I probably wouldn't agree to doing a fee charging people for their demolition.
Well, my understanding is that ordinance 1 is the light side. And we're also looking, this is a substantial change. But we have had issues with some of those lakefront properties, and we have setbacks. People say, well, I had a 4,000 square foot footprint, and you look at the historical photos and you're like, how? And this seems to be a first step. I mean, from my perspective, as I'm reading this, it seems I'm in support of draft 1. It's light, it's not a heavy hand of government, and the onus is still on because it's no structure subject to the provisions of this title. So I guess which structures are subject to the provisions of Title 11?
So anything built in unincorporated county territory, essentially. So Title 11, earlier for building location permits, it has a list of exemptions of what's exempt from requiring a building location permit. So you could add a list of exempt from here, but if the goal is to reduce the tax burden on the individuals, like you really need to know every structure that gets removed. That's why we didn't add an exemption list. So I'm fine either way. Like I said, I don't really have a dog in the fight. I see some benefits to this for the planning department, really on the non-conforming structures, to be able to find a way to memorialize those. We've always offered that as an option, like, hey, you can have my staff come out, just charge an inspection fee, and we'll go out and do your, like, essentially memorialize the structure, measure it out in location and size before you tear it down. I don't know if it's rare that we have anyone ever take us up on that. So this is enforceable as it's written. We do have the building footprint layer, and one of those is destroyed structures. So we could have that list, and we could send notices out for folks and, hey, please let us know when you destroy the structure. So that would always be after the fact, so it's kind of hard to meet it in its entirety. So
I think I'm in support of draft 1 because if I'm understanding this correctly, I mean, so it says no without providing notice, and the notice is the notice of demolition or removal shall be prepared on forms provided by the planning department. The planning department shall have the authority to determine a form is complete. 1 copy of each. I mean,
So I also looked at other counties to see if anyone else has a demolition, and they all they rely on building code, where building code requires some kind of permit for demolition. So the other 2 counties that don't have building codes don't have anything in there, so we're kind of creating something new from this. So that's,
Well, that is part of what my issue is in some ways we're treating things as if we have building codes.
Sure.
When we don't have building codes. And for a lot of people that live in Bonner County, that is why they moved to Bonner County, is for those reasons. And so I think that a lot of good comments have been made, but I think this should go to the public, because if it does get a vote to move forward with this, or to do the workshop, that those are the issues that I know. I'm in an unincorporated area, and I know my people will have issue with this for all of the reasons that you need it, essentially. But it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do, but I do think the public should be able to give some input on this decision, because when you do it that way, even if you make a decision that people don't like, they are able to receive it if they had an opportunity to participate in it. And you're talking about a certain type of homeowner, landowner, and those landowners will have a lot of comments on this. So I would ask the board to allow for the workshop, since you can go either way on that, because even if your office has to enforce it, it works better for you guys being able to enforce it.
When is the workshop?
This is the workshop.
This
No,
is the
he was-
workshop,
he
but
was
here's
commenting on a public
it's a
forum.
twofold deal. It's a plus for the homeowner. And it's a plus for planning and the assessor for the notification requirement, because it comes off his tax roll, saves him money. But it saves the county money having to do the cancellation, all that footwork, back work, verifying, all that. So it does save county money, so I would keep any fee that you might want to put on there very minimal, because the fact that they're complying with it actually saves us money. Now, that piece comes off the tax roll, and it's coming off anyway, because they're going to tear it down anyhow.
The reason I'm using the
But
word, oh, sorry.
The more minimal you keep it, the more apt they are to
So
comply.
I think what
with it.
you're suggesting,
Makes
Commissioner,
sense.
is a public hearing for this and
So
notice
the
in
reason I'm
paper.
saying it is because when we did a workshop before, so prior boards, we've called workshops and we've allowed the community to give input. This board has called workshops and said no input. So reasonably, when it's identified under this board as a workshop, people aren't seeing that as an opportunity to give input. And so however, whatever word you use, I'm saying that it should be so that the people can give input, whether you call it a workshop or you call it something else. But reasonably, I would not have thought I could give input at this hearing, because this board said workshops, they don't agree with public comment. And I'm asking it to be open to public
That
comment.
would be a hearing.
So I'm in-
It doesn't have to be a hearing though, but it would allow us to digest a change like this, especially when you're talking about unincorporated.
We could do it.
People are more apt to show up at a hearing.
We
When they
could,
know that they can give a comment. This board, prior to this board, when we did workshops in Bonner County, the community could give comments in the workshop about what was happening. And that's new for this board, and I'm just saying the public aspect of it would be beneficial for all parties, regardless of what your decision is.
So for the interest of potentially moving forward, when we're looking at this, is there anybody on the board who is interested in the heavier option?
No,
Okay. I'm no as well.
I'm not.
So we
I'm
can
a
strike,
draft one guy.
I like draft
With
one.
minimal
I am
fee.
interested, so would we like to have, it was in the Bonner County Daily Bee. It was published, and it doesn't sound as if there's been much.
we could
Mr. Corn's
notice,
here?
Is there public input today? or
Yeah.
not?
What would
Is
you,
there-
yeah.
But-
What would
I'd
you-
like to speak whenever.
And I 100% support him speaking, but my point is, in the last time we did a workshop, you denied everybody to speak, saying they weren't allowed to speak. And so because of that inconsistency, I think it needs to be made clear that the public is welcome to speak in workshops, because specifically, you said people could not speak in workshops, and that has been part of why I think people don't come to a workshop under this board. But I think Corn should speak. And I think anyone should be able to speak. It's just, we haven't had a precedence of speaking at workshops specifically because of what you said.
Because Mr. Corn is a contractor and a builder.
with the,
He'd be putting input in as a consultant.
with
No,
the,
no, that's
He's just
not
the
what it is. That's not what it is.
And a
It's not
property
a
owner.
special citizen of Idaho or resident of Bonner County.
Whatever you'll call it.
so with the planning commission, oftentimes we'll have items closed to public comment as they're drafting stuff. And then we'll list it on the agenda as open to public comment in red. So people know, like when they're looking at our agendas, please come and comment on these things, because it's in a more final draft version. So if we want to do a second public workshop, and on the agenda and we can even notice it in the paper if you like, and we can put open for public comment to try to elicit more comment to come in, and just still call it a workshop. We don't have to call it a hearing, but just as essentially the same thing, so.
This this language published?
Yeah, it was published as like an attachment to the agenda. So if they clicked on the agenda link, it's the next 3 pages. So
This wasn't in the paper.
no, not the language itself. So
So I'm in support of having we would advertise in the paper with only ordinance 1. And we will do it as a workshop, see if we get more
With public comment.
with public comment, we can make that clear. What say you board members?
Absolutely.
But I still want to hear what Ron has to say.
we have a member online as well if you want to open up for.
Yeah, well, if we're gonna let Ron speak, we gotta let anybody else speak.
That's fair.
I mean, he's special, but not that
Not that
special.
special.
No. Okay,
So, I have
will
a
you just
few,
say your name so we all know who you are, Mr. Corn?
Ron Corn, and I am a Bonner County resident. I have a few concerns myself when I heard about this, and I just assumed, I'm sorry, it's my fault, that we were allowed to speak at the workshops. But I came here today to kind of voice my opinion a little bit. I do like draft 1 better than draft 2 myself, but to me, draft 1 still overreaches. As a property owner, it says that, how does the stormwater thing work? Because that was mentioned in draft 1.
Sure.
And the only way that that's gonna work is to have a county employee come onto my property, right?
Not necessarily. So it's when you, Katie, you know this code better than I do because it's building. So it's you disturb more than 4,000 square feet,
Yeah.
or is that the big trigger?
Yeah, and then it'd be temporary
Which is fair
erosion
size
control,
area.
and if we're only accepting pictures, then
Yeah.
I think that would suffice.
So really, we're worried about if someone's going to demolish and like tear up a large like concreted area.
If they're just
That's-
taking down the building to
Yeah.
foundation.
I don't think-
and
Well,
Not
this-
disturbing the surrounding soil, there's
Yeah,
no need.
I don't think
And
it would
the
apply very
stormwater, I don't know
often.
if the
So
stormwater would be necessarily required.
it's more of an erosion control plan.
Yeah, it is more than erosion control and something like that.
And that's gonna be
Temporary
left up
erosion
to the homeowner, or is that gonna be left up to the county?
I would think it would
Stormwater
be, not the stormwater, but the temporary erosion control would be left up to, left up to the landowner. And then if they didn't install erosion control, I'm gonna hear about it regardless. If it's going on to somebody else's property or disturbing the road, like I'm gonna start getting complaints about it if it's a lot of disturbance.
What would you do if you got a photograph and it showed there was a problem with no control? You guys would police that though, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would send a notice.
Because
to
I
the
think that's what
landowner.
you were getting at is,
After the fact,
Yeah.
yeah, because personally,
Because
if
then
I'm
it
gonna
falls
tear
on
down
you.
my woodshed or my dilapidated barn that's been there since the 50s, I'm not gonna get a permit, I'm not gonna ask the government permission, I'm not gonna pay a fee, if I'm not gonna rebuild it. Now, it is a benefit to me if it's on the tax roll, but if my dilapidated barn that is worth me tearing down because it's a safety issue, it's probably not causing a whole lot of value to my property in the first place. It's probably valued at $1,000, which is costing me, what, $1 a year in taxes. So it's not that big of a deal. Just coming from a homeowner's and a property owner's aspect, I don't think, I'm not gonna use this word, but it'd be hard to comply, if you will, because it's growing big government again. I think, maybe a change of the wording, a notice or something would be great, make it optional. Let the people know, hey, if you don't tell the county you're tearing this building down, just know that you're still getting charged property taxes.
Up to January
I did
1st.
my due diligence as the government. I told you, I informed you. Now it's up to the property owner to decide, I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna keep paying taxes on something I don't have. But I just really
Well, there-
hate seeing more permits, permissions, and fees coming from our government.
It's an issue.
Well, I guess maybe I'm a little confused because I'm not seeing anything in here with a penalty, and it's talking about a notice, so I think that I'd like to be clear, because partially when we're talking about this, we're also talking about taxes and assessments. And because the tax code, the unit statute, not Bonner County ordinance, says if I build a new structure with or without a BLP, I've added value to my property, and statute says that the assessor must assign a value, just like the assessor says, or statute says if something is removed, they've got to figure out, and Bonner County is responsible to figure that out with our tax structure. That's where I really think the value of what this is, of what this could do, and this feels pretty light. I'm not understanding how with this current draft, we're really growing government.
I think the difference is, and it maybe some people can't quantify if you don't live in the unincorporated, more rural, but I can tell you, I think there are whole little unincorporated areas that would rather pay $1 extra than give notice to the government. I mean, that
Yeah,
is a
you're in
lot
North
of the,
Dakota.
so when I sit here on something like this, I'm looking at it from the eye of the area that I live in and understanding that landscape, which is why regardless of which decision you go, I would like the public to have notice of an opportunity to give input, but I do believe you will end up with people that don't care that they're overpaying their tax to you. They just want to do their thing on their land, and that allows them that right to do that because they're the ones overpaying and they've accepted that. And the property is still valued because unless someone removes that from the tax rolls, you guys are assessing the value based on the structures there. What you're trying to prevent is the person who wants it to come off of the tax rolls, and that person could have a deadline to do that, otherwise pay what it would cost because they didn't do it timely. But it also allows the people in unincorporated Bonner County the privacy that they moved here for on rural land. And that is from a living in that area. And I do think it might be a difference between city versus the people that don't care about the taxes. They know they just want it to be low and they're not counting every penny, but they know they don't want you to trespass.
I agree with Ron said, other than his reference to things being built in the 50s and dilapidated.
My stuff then was built in the 50s, dilapidated.
It depends on
I think he was talking about.
who was the builder.
Easy, Ron, I was built in the 50s.
But I understand his sentiment, and it concurs with yours, is we should put the onus on the back of the individual.
Right.
And
And if you put the word requirement in there, it kind of implies that if you don't do it, there's a penalty, which it's still on the tax rolls. That would be your penalty.
The other component to this, I think, we aren't just talking about a woodshed. We're also talking about a lakefront home that might be looking at, when we're assessing it, $20,000 a foot, which we are for certain structures. And you're looking at a lakefront home and someone says, well, I had a 400 square foot cabin. And then they bring in their BLP and they want to build a 3,200 square foot on that piece. I take into account also the litigatory aspects of whether it's keep Bonner County rural, project, whomever it may be. I have no, this provides us a way to protect that homeowner who has that old lakefront property, as well as providing the assessor and planning some historical reference to what was there.
But you're talking about unincorporated area, and just like if I say, I do not want the assessor to come on my property, I am subject to being over-assessed because you guys didn't get to have eyes on. There are people, and I'm one of those, who said, I don't care what you assess, and I don't want to deal with that. There are people in unincorporated areas that pick that option, and that is, we're not talking about people in the city, we're talking about the unincorporated mindset. And you guys as a department have made huge strides with that population over this last year. And regardless of the direction, I know my district would rather pay more than mess with this. And they are getting a consequence for not doing it just as much as they get a consequence for not allowing the on-site assessor as the individual. So, and I think to address kind of what Commissioner Ahmed said is, the person in unincorporated is not looking for the county to protect it. They're saying, I can do it myself. And that is my position as an unincorporated liver. I don't believe that's the issue of that group of people. And that's what this is specifically targeting. And I see him nodding his head, so I think we're on the same page on what that is.
Sorry,
Well,
yeah.
that's some, but there's 52,000 people, and when I look at the number of BOEs that come in for Upper Priest Lake or Priest Lake, those two are unincorporated areas. Or when we're looking at Lakeshore Drive along Priest River. So
there are some big structures that have been taken down and replaced. We have people who spend millions of dollars for a piece of property, tear down a perfectly good house, to build a house that they want.
That is not the majority of unincorporated Bonner County. That is outside of the bell curve.
I
And because
understand.
you know this is cleanup of property of a mobile home or a dilapidated
But
barn.
if that person comes in later and they want
An adjustment,
an adjustment, our position is gonna be, and I want the board to understand, if you didn't let us know as of
Yeah.
this date, we're
but
assessing.
that is actually in line with the mission of Bonner County. It is buyer beware. It is the onus is on the individual. So to do this is actually shifting kind of that mindset, whereas we have been in a lot of sticky situations. Too bad, you should have made yourself informed. This would be consistent with making yourself informed and doing your due diligence versus us increasing the policing. And I understand it doesn't sound like we're gonna vote on it, but at the same time, regardless of which direction, it should be unincorporated Bonner County that we're paying, because that's what we're paying attention to.
We don't
And-
have jurisdiction over incorporated Bonner County, so.
Well, the reason I am pointing it out is some of the references are not what the majority of unincorporated looks like. We're looking at the ones that are outside the bell curve. The person who bought the $10 million property that wants to tear it down and rebuild, that's really not what this is going to address. It's mostly going to address the other portion that is the majority of unincorporated, which is a lot of old structures, things that were built poorly by some handyman in the 50s.
So Mr. Evans is here. He's been a compliance investigator for, 4 years? I'm sure he has a lot of field time that can weigh in on this.
Yeah, Commissioner, I appreciate your time. As the director said, I'm Brian Evans, compliance investigator with planning. And I have not talked to any of my bosses, so I appreciate him recognizing me.
Yeah.
But I was overhearing a portion of this online. And I think too much of the direction of this has gone towards the assessor side of it. I've spoken with the director in favor of something like this, and my thoughts are it is protecting the property owner by memorializing the structure in the location it was, which allows them to tear it down long before they rebuild it, and that gives them a document that's in place that identifies exactly where it was so that under our code, they can rebuild like for like in the exact same location without any permit or anything. That's allowed under the code. So from my point of view, as a citizen of the county, if I had a legal non-conforming structure, I would like to memorialize that so that it may be something where I need to tear it down to do my other work several years before I'm ever able to rebuild it. That's not the case on my property, but I'm always coming at everything as what's in the best interest of the people we serve. And in my mind, that allows them to do the work, remove an old structure, and still memorialize it at the county so that we can confirm it, yes, indeed, there was a structure in that location. And as a secondary effect, it allows the assessors to remove it from the tax rolls for the period of time where it's no longer there, or if they decide not to rebuild it, whether it becomes a mandatory issue or a voluntary issue, give people the option to fill that out if they want to memorialize that structure and be able to rebuild it in the location that they had it in. So that's my 2 cents worth.
For me, it's the same though, because when you say your first part is to protect the property owner, my answer is the property owner's job is to protect themselves. And they got a building location permit to begin with. They know where the structure was, and if they have to apply for another building location permit because they didn't do this, what we're doing is saying we are requiring you to accept my protection, and that's not representative of unincorporated areas in Bonner County. Because if that's the sole reason for doing it, there's no reason to do it. Because that's not our job to say we want to protect your interests, so fill out this form. When I hear both of those, it is really the issue on the assessor's side that makes sense to address some of the issue. It's just where does the onus lie? And for my view, the onus lies on the property owner, not on local government to police the property to preserve a right or to preserve a structure or any of that. And a reasonable consequence is if you didn't do it, you gotta pay taxes on it. You should have let us know to protect your own right.
And I have no problem putting the onus on the individual, as long as I think it's fair to let people know that if they don't do that there is going to be a consequence. The consequence means they're going to have to pay a tax.
Yeah.
At least for that next year.
You just keep paying if they never call you.
What do you got, Mr. Evans?
Commissioner, I just wanted to address what you were saying. In my mind, there's currently no way for people to go through a process. They can notify the assessor's office, but there's no process currently to allow them to notify the planning department to memorialize that structure so that they can rebuild it. And with all due respect, typically the structures we're talking about are legal non-conforming, which means there was never a permit pulled on them ever in the past. Anything pre-1977 had no permitting in Bonner County. So this would actually memorialize it on a document and allow them to, as you say, protect themselves. It would give them an avenue to actually protect their property and their property rights based on the structures that were memorialized on that.
Aren't they memorializing their tax bill though? Because the assessor assesses based on structures.
I can't answer, I don't know.
The structures
anything about
are
the assessor.
accounted for. There isn't, it's not that it's not accounted for. It is accounted for on your tax bill. You're gonna, like, I know I get,
Tax purposes.
yeah, it says I've got a house and how many outbuildings and that's what my taxes are. And so it's not, the goal isn't for us to
No.
institute a rule to protect. It is what's the purpose? And your purpose is a reasonable purpose. It's just which direction you go. The structure's identified already because you're taxing us on it.
So for me, I've got one on my property that's actually pre-77. It's about pre-37. One of them things I've been gonna tear down, but I just hadn't got around to it. It's a great place for skunks to grow. And I had talked to planning and zoning prior that, rebuild back in the same spot. What I gotta do? Well, if you don't change the footprint, tear it down, build back the same place with something that's not sitting on 3 cedar stumps. That's part of the foundation. And, but that falls on me as the landowner. And it's on the tax roll, been on the tax roll ever since they had a tax roll, I guess. It's certainly on my tax roll. And I just don't think I need permission from anybody to tear it down. I have a problem with that. I really do. And I don't, for me, it's a no straight across the board.
Do we need an ordinance? Could we not create a demolition process without the ordinance?
Yeah.
I mean, I might be the only, I see the value to this because I'm also of the impression that LUPA requires us to protect property rights. That what would prevent us from creating a process without the ordinance? Is there a problem with that?
In the planning department, anything that we do typically is backed up by ordinance. So any procedure we have is, we codify it in code. And this falls outside of LUPA because this is Title 11 building
Yeah.
regulations. So yes, you're charged with upholding, health, safety, welfare of individuals, but that's typically like your land use code and whatnot. So Title 11 is like the implementation of Title 12. It's the on the ground. So this is the way that I would suggest if you want something through the planning department. We can make some changes in here and soften up this language some more. You can make it not required. You can change the applicability. But if you want it to come through planning, I think it needs to be codified in code. If it's just a procedure side on the assessor's office, the assessors could reach out to other other counties and see how they've handled this, and if there's just a procedure and a form that they can, have in their department. Maybe we can work together and those can get noticed to planning staff so we can have a record of it. But,
I
yeah.
think you create
What if we were to make it not required?
out
But
of
we put it in
heart thought
code.
when you said you have an obligation to protect my right
Once
to
you put it into
labor
code,
on
it
my
kind
property.
of is
It's-
a requirement. And at some point in time, if it's a requirement, a board is gonna put a penalty on
Commissioner?
it. And,
Which one? There's three of us.
Oh, sorry.
and for me, I think, just like Ron and Commissioner Williams said, it's an overreach. Property rights, it's mine. I can tear it down if I want to. End of story. If I don't notify the county, I still have to pay taxes on it. It's the way it is. But as far as telling somebody, you can't tear down your stuff until you notify us, no.
Be honest, I don't
big
think
no
the
across there.
appropriate air is gonna actually do it
It's-
either.
And we are in the Pacific Northwest where a lot of the population is, I don't want the assessor on my property, and I tell people, there's a risk in that. He's gonna assess your property every year. Every 4 years or 5 years, he's gonna come and do an on-site. If he can't get on site, that's where the risk falls, because now he has to guess. And he's probably not gonna guess in your favor. He's gonna guess that it is really good quality construction and it is this size. And then you're gonna be back complaining that he assessed it way more higher than what it's worth because it's old and wore out, but you didn't let him on the property, and you end up here at the BOE.
Commissioners, obviously need to go past Mr. Wilson, but typically legal language allows for may and shall. If this was written in, property owner may notify and allow them that opportunity, and that would protect their legal rights in the location without any question. Commissioner, you're absolutely right. Under the code, you can demolish your structure and you can rebuild in the exact location. The question, the onus then falls on you if it comes up later in an aerial survey and that the structure showed back up and you may or may not have needed a building location permit, so you will likely get a building violation and will have to go through the process to prove that the structure was in the exact same location, met the exact same setbacks as it was prior to tearing it down. So, in my opinion, as you can tell, I am in favor of something like this. But in my opinion, I really like what you're saying about not having us require it. But I think the difference between may and shall makes all the difference. It allows a property owner that wants to, the ability to, and the process to, and doesn't require the planning department or anybody else to enforce if they choose not to.
Why do you need an ordinance if the person is willing to let them know? You don't need any changes. The whole purpose is to require it such that you have the desired outcome. If it's a may, there's no point to doing it. You guys need it to be an expectation from the assessor side of it because you're wanting to address the impact that some of those structures have on the bottom line of taxes. So it's either you agree that they shall do it or you don't need to do anything related to this. Because then it doesn't do anything to say you could tell. We could self-report on our own.
Mr. Corn?
So could the county not just have a form to fill out for property owners who wish to report that they are going to or did demolish a building? And on that form, there would be a place for them to submit pictures of the building before they tore it down and after it got tore down, so the assessor could take that off of their assessment and be done with it. Because the majority of my friends, all three of them, they don't want government to protect them. They They don't want government to make sure that they're safe. They feel like they can do it on their own. And this is just seen as another overreach, whereas if you put the burden on the property owner, which is where it should be, in my opinion, that, hey, I'm gonna tear a building down, obviously I'm paying taxes on it, I'm gonna go in and get the form, no fees or anything else, I'm gonna take it home and fill out my address, and submit pictures, and turn it back in to whichever department would be right to accept that, whether it's the planning department or the assessor's office, then go ahead and tear it down. Now, that's talking about, I'm not gonna rebuild, okay, I just wanna tear it down and be done with it. But if I plan on rebuilding it, it would benefit the property owner, obviously, to have documentation that pull and take measures, taking pictures of it before, whatever, and put that either in a file or submit that to one of the departments, recorder's office. I'm not sure where the proper place would be to submit that, so that 2 years down the road, when I do want to rebuild, the county can pull that information up, say, yep, you know, we had it down as a 30 by 40, I'm gonna replace it with a 30 by 40, no permits, check the box, I get to start rebuilding. But I, along with a few others, really don't like government taking care of us. Okay,
When you do
we
that-
don't, you know, respect you guys and everything, but
When you do your building location permit, because that opens up a different question for me, when you're continuing to build and you haven't completed, I remember throughout some of the years of me doing a build, I would get a call and they would just say, show me a picture of the next thing that you've done on that project. And I'm assuming that the county was keeping that photograph to keep the building location permit going until the structure was moved in. And so with what Corn is saying, if I care as a homeowner, then I should do that on my own. And so you should, I mean, the form in your office should suffice for that. And then it's an, oh, well, you should have thought about this form and learned about it if you didn't. Because I 100% agree that we're trying to force protection from the government to say you want to preserve my right to rebuild exactly, when that's my job to preserve my right. And if I didn't, then here's a form you should have filled out. And I think that is going to weigh more, because we kind of benefit more than we lose on the people that won't report that they took it down.
Is that a possibility, Mr. Gabel, if there was to be rewritten, as Mr. Evans suggests, as a may, and I believe that you already addressed it, that processes the planning department, because with humans, there's the ability for all of us to hear the same thing and come up with different conclusions as to what was stated. So if we were to come back with a different draft that was a may, is that, so then it's a may, it's not a shall. It provides the opportunity for the homeowner who doesn't want there to go through that process for those, but then for those who may want that, and that would provide a background in ordinance that would allow for that. Is that something that the board is even interested in? Because right now it's sounding like I'm the lone man out, which is okay.
My
But I
answer
don't
is
need to-
no, because it's a may. If it's a may,
Well, if it's a
not
no, we
worth-
don't need to waste time. Let's just say we're done.
I
Yeah.
think making it permissive allows for the process in which to memorialize a structure. So it solves the planning problem. And it also says, well, if you wanted to, you could have done it this route. So
So I'm
I
gonna
think
say.
if you were to put it in there. Go ahead, Aiken.
I was gonna say, being an unincorporated person, I would say if you put an ordinance that said may, you're just waiting to change it to a shall. That's how,
Yeah.
I'm 100% telling you, that's how unincorporated people think. And that is just, let me shift the Overton window just a little bit, and then we're gonna make it a shall. It's either we want to do it or we don't want to do it. And I can tell you, for representing my district, mine is going to be a no, because I don't believe that, I think it is an overreach. I think that the consequence of not doing it should impact people enough that they do it if they care about it, but not that you force me to be protected in the way that you believe I should be protected, because a lot of us feel we don't want you on the property because we're protecting something different that we don't care about, for you to know. I mean, that's how it is
I
in
understand the
that area.
motivation here was to get accurate, fair assessments. And if we know that you've torn down that thing, before we make that assessment January 1, we can take that in consideration, so you're not, this assessed for it, that was the.
And I 100%, and for me, if it's $1 for you not to have to cross my border, I'll pay you $1. That's my district.
So.
And I don't think
Wait,
that's gonna
Hold on,
change.
Mr. Evans.
You done?
Yeah, sir.
Okay. If we were gonna throw this into chapter 11, or title 11, notice of demolition or removal, it is beneficial to the landowner. And then list the benefits of why you would do that. And if you plan to rebuild in the same footprint, then the permit is not required. And it saves you money because it takes it off the tax roll for the time being. That is about as extensive as I would get it if I was gonna put it in there. Just letting the people know that we have an ordinance that addresses it, tells you what the benefits are, and if you wanna rebuild, it saves you a lot of time and trouble down the road if you build back on that same footprint because it's already an established spot. End of story.
So we've
I
had,
wouldn't go any more detailed than that, other than just listing the benefits and the why it would be nice to do that. That
And
it
we
gets
don't
you
need
off
a
the
law to
tax
do
roll,
that.
blah, blah,
We
blah,
can
blah.
just tell them. Because I would interpret it as that's just you taking an inch to punt it down the field farther. If it's just to give notice of the value of it, I think the assessor and planner's office can offer a tool by which people can say, hey, you just put it in your little flyer box. Otherwise, if you're not fully enforcing something, there's no point of making a rule for it. And from what Commissioner Bradshaw said, he's just using the ordinance section as a public notice of the benefits of doing something. We don't need a rule for that. That's a flyer.
so the second item on this agenda was the discussion and the decision to direct staff to process the amendment. What are we asking staff to do? Are we saying there's no interest? Or are we asking staff to bring back another revision to the board?
I'd make a motion to can it.
I'm with
Just
Bradshaw.
can it.
Well, that's 2-1, so there we go. So at this time,
But that's
there's
just
no,
me.
well, I'm doing math here. 2, 1. That means I lose. I think I'm in favor of it, but I lose. So be it. I think that the board has given the direction. Are there any further questions?
No.
All right. No, there's no,
Really, we only need a motion if you want to direct me to move forward with it. If we're just going to say
I'd say
the appetite
table.
of the board is no, and I'll just
let's
file that in my
let's
square can. So,
put it in the rectangular bin
yep.
and we'll address it once necessary. All right.
Okay.
Cool. Madam Clerk, it's 2:59. This meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Campbell.
I don't know.